Welcome to the public webinar series of Tokyo College Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Tokyo. My name is Naoko Shimazu, and I'm a global historian and professor and deputy director of Tokyo College, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. So now allow me to introduce today's panelists. Our speaker is Professor Frank Upham, who is the Wilf Family Professor of Property Law Emeritus at the School of Law, New York University. He is a specialist in law and development and various issues in comparative law and society with a focus on East Asia and the developing world. He has held a number of visiting positions in Japan since the 1970s. He's an author of numerous important work, including the 2018 book called The Great Property Fallacy, Theory, Reality and Growth in Developing Countries from the Cambridge University Press, which has been translated into Japanese in 2023, published from the Kobe University Press, translated by Irie Katsunori and Kaneko Yuka. Now, in 1987, he was awarded the Thomas J. Wilson Prize for his book, Law and Social Change in Post-War Japan, from Harvard University Press. Last year, he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, gold raised with neck ribbon. Today, he is back as Tokyo College professor, so welcome back, Frank. Now, to comment, we have Professor Shirahase Sawako, who is Senior Vice Rector of the United Nations University. Professor Shirahase works on social stratification and inequality and widely on gender studies. And she is actually from the University of Tokyo as well, where she was professor of sociology in the Graduate School of Humanities and Sociology, and also served as an executive vice president for international affairs of the University of Tokyo from 2019 to 2021. She has served on various Japanese government councils and policy advisory boards. I first met Professor Shirahase at the University of Oxford, I think it was in 1986 or 7, so, which is where she obtained her PhD in sociology. So it's a great pleasure to see you again here at the University of Tokyo, Tokyo College. So before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to the availability of simultaneous translation. Please click the translation button at the bottom of the screen in order to switch to Japanese or English, depending on the language of the speaker. For the Q&A session, please post your questions in English or Japanese in the chat box on the screen. Today's lecture will be in English. Now, today Professor Upham will speak on equal rights, unequal reality, law and gender equality in Japan. Without further ado, I shall pass the floor to you, Frank.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Tokyo College, Tokyo University, and given my history with Japan, which I will briefly mention, I guess, all of Japan. It's a great honor for me to be here and to have these two fellow panelists. And I will try to present my perspective, and then Professor Shirahase will provide, I think, a complementary perspective on the status of men and women, mothers and fathers in Japan. And then I hope we will have a wide-ranging discussion. I am not an expert as on gender. I, as was described, have spent a long time studying Japan, but my interest in Japan is extremely broad, although I see Japan as interesting because it is very much like the United States, and I like to see the difference that law makes, a similar law in different societies. So An alternative title for my talk, one that I have used in the past, is What Does Law Have to Do with It? And the gist of my curiosity is that Japan is ranked 119th in the World Economic Forum ranking on gender equality. It is just below Nepal and just above Burkina Faso. What is remarkable about that is Japan is an affluent democracy. Neither Nepal nor Burkina Faso nor the other 117 or most of the 117 countries above Japan is either one of those. But what I want to talk about today is the meaning or effect of law. Japan, United States, France, another country that I'm studying, all have identical laws about gender discrimination. And yet the reality can be quite different. And that's what I want to talk about. But I start with a personal story. 40 years ago, just about 1986, if we're talking about 1986, my wife and I brought our family to suburban Tokyo. We sent our daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, to the local kindergarten, the local yochien. This was a part of Tokyo where there were no other foreigners living. And our daughter, whose name is Brooks, was the first foreign child to go there. There are many interesting experiences that my daughter had in that environment, but I want to talk about the parents, not the children. As my wife and I had done in the United States, we alternated taking our daughter to the yochien, to the kindergarten. My wife made, when we took our daughter, of course, we encountered other parents. My wife made lifelong friends with some of the mothers of our daughter's friends. In fact, my wife is right now today visiting a museum with one of the people from that, it was called Nakase Yochien. I did not see, meaning see, a single father the entire year that I was going there. My reaction to that was not that this was, I guess it's a form of gender discrimination. But when we normally talk about gender discrimination, we talk about the harm done to mothers, to women. To me, in this circumstance, I often say, if I had to choose at that time whether to be a woman in Japan or a man in Japan, I would choose to be a woman. Because from my experience, the Japanese fathers were excluded from family life. And family life, for most people, not for perhaps people like Elon Musk, who is involved in the entire world, but for most of us, family is the core of our lives. So that was 40 years ago. A lot has changed, but and including here at Tokyo University. But what remains and what is puzzling to me and what I want to address is the ranking of Japan at 118th. Why is this? Unlike 40 years ago, 50 years ago, Japanese women and Japanese mothers work at essentially the same percentage as American or European mothers and women. I think the ranking, to the extent that I understand it, is explained by the lack of women at the very top of Japanese companies, Japanese national government. So, for example, in the group of seven, the G7, Japan is 31 positions below Italy, which is the second level G7 country in terms of gender equality. So what I want to look at is the effect of law. I can't speak to the general status of women in either the United States or in Japan. But what is curious to me is two societies that have essentially identical laws. The Equal Employment Opportunity Law, which was passed in 1985, is a symbol of legal equality in Japan. And it was the result of a long process, decades-long process of legislation. I want to talk a little bit about that law because I think attitudes towards that law can tell us something about the stereotypes of Japan, Japanese society, the role of litigation in Japan, and the social role of Japanese women in Japan. The general conventional wisdom about the Equal Employment Opportunity Law is that it was the result of what Japanese call gaiatsu, foreign pressure. The conventional wisdom is that the United States and other critics of Japan pushed Japan to be like the United States. I should point out, I studied Japan. I've also studied China and spent years living in China. I study these two societies. I have no intention or desire to change them. Many Americans who come to China or Japan are trying to create something there. I'm not. In my seminars, I often refer to Japan as the world's most successful society. So this is not, I am not urging Japan to do anything. My concern is with the United States, not with Japan. But what I want to talk about, so many Americans and many Japanese, I think that the Equal Employment Opportunity Act was created by outside pressure. That's simply not true. The Equal Employment Opportunity Act was created by domestic pressure brought by two features of Japanese society, which are often underestimated, in my opinion. First, the political role of women, and second, the political role and social role of Japanese courts. The Equal Employment Opportunity Law was created because Japanese women, starting in 1950 or 51, began, I'd say Japanese women, Japanese female employees started to bring lawsuits. Japanese who supposedly have a weak legal consciousness started to bring lawsuits, one after another, after another, after another, about inequalities in the gender situation in Japanese companies. They won those lawsuits. Wages, hours, types of work wasn't completely successful. There are some types of work where women were kept out of because they were supposedly dangerous. Like women couldn't go home after 8 p.m. Anyway, ridiculous to me, but so the point is, women were bringing these lawsuits. Now, one of my favorite conversations, I interviewed the plaintiffs in these cases. One of my favorite conversations was with a husband. And I was being told by Americans and Japanese that Japanese husbands didn't want their wives to work, didn't want their wives to make, a little bit of money, okay, but not. So I asked this husband, we were sitting in a courtroom, what do you think of your wife bringing this lawsuit? And he smiled and he said, I want her to make more money. It's exactly what I wanted my wife to do. And she did. She made more money than me for most of our lives. It's because I was an academic. So the first point is the plaintiffs. The second point is the judges. Another cliche, conventional wisdom about Japanese legal system. First is that Japanese plaintiffs, Japanese people do not sue. The second is that Japanese judges are conservative. I disagree. I think that many of the fundamental social changes in Japan over the last 80 years, going back to the early 1950s, were initiated by Japanese judges. So, for example, permanent employment, the low divorce rate, the status of women in companies, these are all attributed to quote, tradition, although none of them existed before World War II. So think about what the tradition is hard for me. But one of the things, so many things have changed, and they have changed because of a combination of, and I use this word, advisedly, aggressive female plaintiffs, and I mean aggressive, not that they're like some plaintiffs are. I've studied the pollution cases and the sit-ins and stuff, but in the US, many plaintiffs are really aggressive emotionally. These women were not aggressive emotionally, they just wanted more pay. And the other is that Japanese judges are conservative. But these cases are brought and they're won often without clear legal authority. There often is legal authority, equal wages, but equal wages for identical work was the only law that was clearly on the statute. Japanese judges in many areas have used vague parts of the Civil Code, Article 90, Article 14 of the Constitution, to advance social, what I would call progress. So What puzzles me is, given this background, why, to go back to the beginning, why does the World Economic Forum rank Japan so low on gender equality? And as I said, I think it has to do with who's at the top. And there are, what I should have said, this is an incredibly complicated issue. And I'm looking at only one slice of it, and that is, what does the law, the statute, the Horitsu, what does that have to do with it? But given the success of litigation by female plaintiffs through the decades, why has the number of women at the top in Japanese society, both public, political, why, and commercial, why has that remained significantly lower than in other, and this is an important qualification, other affluent, other rich democracies? That's the group I'm looking at. I'm not looking at China. I'm not looking at countries that are not rich democracies. And the question might be answered by the hypothesis that Japanese courts were willing, and with plaintiffs, to find inequalities at the lower levels of Japanese companies and bureaucracies, but that they would not do so when they got to management inequality. So it's at the top that I'm interested in. So, and that's a very plausible explanation, because while it's easy to look at a technical track in a Japanese corporation 40 years ago, where women were doing technical issues, and it was all women, and men were on the management track, and the women could only go so high, it was easy for a court to say, if the women can do this, they can do that. And more important, as judges, we can make that judge. We can make that judgment. But when it gets to the top of a large corporation, that requires incredible understanding of what management is. And as courts, we can't really do that. That's a plausible explanation. But a couple of cases have occurred recently which make that explanation not work. I have looked a little bit at one of those cases. It's the Amex case. It's called Amex, the Amex case in Japan. The American Express in Japan, I assume. And in that case, I want to talk about that case a little bit, because I think it's might be important, might not be. The plaintiff in 2008 joined Amex, and she was a contract employee, like the women doing the technical things historically. She was shifted to the management track, the previously male track, in 2010. She was appointed a group leader in 2014, and she was publicly praised by the vice president of Amex as being one of the leading model managers. Then her family made the decision that has tremendous effect on families, and in every society I know of has particular effect on women. Her husband and she decided to have a child. She took the maternity leave that she was entitled to, and I don't know whether her husband took leave. There are societies that put great emphasis on fathers taking paternity leave as well as mothers taking maternity leave. I don't know that fact. She returned to Amex, and Amex put her in the same position that she had before. Amex, the company, did exactly what they were legally required to do. Then she and her husband, I assume they were married. Can't assume that anymore as much as you could 40 years ago. She and her husband made the same mistake again. They had a second child. She took her second maternity leave, and when she came back, Amex, knowing what the law was, the law didn't say, you know, one maternity leave, but you don't get two. It didn't say that. They had eliminated the management position that she had been in before. So they could not put her back into that exact same position. What they did, because I assume because of the advice of their legal department, or maybe they just did it without a legal requirement, they created a position for her that had the same financial, almost the same, not quite, but almost the same financial and managerial status, but was an artificially created position. So she was not satisfied. Because she had nothing to do. She was, I believe the phrase in Japanese in the past has been madogiwa, the person sitting next to the window who was shut out of management and could just look out the window. In the US, people like to be at the window, but apparently in Japan, it's a different situation. So she was shunted metaphorically by the window. She sued. And now this is what is interesting to me and to American colleagues that I have discussed it with. She could not claim that she was damaged economically. She could not claim that her status had been, at least in terms of regulations, management regulations, had been damaged. All she could claim was, and it's important, is that her career prospects had been damaged. Career prospects for a management person, if you're in a labor union or you're just labor, I mean, the statuses are clear, but career prospects is very vague. But the Tokyo High Court said that her career prospect had been harmed because she was a woman, and therefore that Amex had committed, I guess, a tort, an illegal act. Maybe it was a violation of labor law. I'm not quite sure how they phrased it. And Amex had to pay her damages. I've been told that there is another case like this. I'm not familiar with that case, so I'm just talking about the Amex case. And what is interesting to me, there are many things interesting to me about it. First is my American colleagues find this a remarkable case, progressive case from the point of view of gender equality in the workplace. But the other thing is two things, really. Will this case with the Tokyo High Court, the most prestigious high court, apologies to the Osaka High Court, and, will this case lead to a lot of other cases? I don't know. If it does, then this talk, this lecture, is meaningless, because I'm sort of assuming it will not. The other question is, what is happening at the political level? So with Japan's ranking at 118, is gender becoming a political issue in Japan? And I know that same surnames, fufu besse, allowing spouses to keep their original surname when they get married rather than having to have a single surname. And as I'm sure most people in the audience know, the single surname is over 95% the male's name. There is political discussion about changing the law so that married couples can register with the koseki, the whatever that is in English, with separate surnames and register their marriage. That has been adopted by one of the opposition parties. The Liberal Democratic Party has said the equivalent of kangaete okimasu ne. They're thinking about it. Parts of the Liberal Democratic Party want to do it, but there are conservative parts of the party, or there are parts of the party that are described as conservative who feel that will be against the Japanese tradition of family. The other, and what I wonder is, will that become a broader political issue? And then on a second level, will the relative lack, not just relative, but absolute lack of women at the top of management and government and bureaucracy in Japan become a more general issue in elections? Okay. I want to step back and say that there have been incredible changes in those 40 years I'm describing. I actually came to Japan first in 1965, so it's even more than 40 years. There are lots of incredible changes, but it's the pace of change that seems to me to be slower than it is in other societies. And there's discussion of quotas in various ways that try to accelerate this. And I don't know how that's going to work, or whether it's going to be adopted by the Liberal Democratic Party or by other parts of the government, or by parts of the government. And I don't know whether Japanese society wants it. So to go back to the beginning, when I was taking our daughter to the Yochien, I never saw another father. I didn't think, oh, Japanese fathers are so lucky. They get to work from early in the morning to late at night, and they get to play golf with their boss on Sunday. I didn't think that. Thought exactly the opposite. So My reaction is not to feel sorry for Japanese men or Japanese women or Japanese society. As I say, to me, Japan is one of the most successful societies in the world. And I know you've had a bad lost decade. The United States had some hard times. But to me, as I walk around Japan, living here for the last, lived here on and off for a very, very, very long time, I do not see a society in decline. I do not see a society in crisis. So I'm not saying, oh, Japan's got to do something about this. I'm just making an observation. And to repeat, my observation is, what does law have to do with social structure? Japan has the same law as France, as Germany, as the United States, and yet on gender, and yet the difference is so stark. Why?
Hello. Thank you very much. Can I say Professor Frank? And it's hard to write pronunciation in your last name, so I rather
Just call me Frank, not
Yes,
Professor Frank.
Sorry.
Or if it's make it
It's really
Frank
strange.
Sensei.
Okay, Frank Sensei. Okay,
No, just
but
Frank.
I prefer Frank. Thank you very much. It was really fascinating talk. But before, saying that, I'd like to, say thank you for, giving me an opportunity to make a comment on such a fascinating talk to the Tokyo College. This is a very, honor to have a chance to discuss this kind of issues. And I'm a sociologist. I'm doing a macro sociologist. And so I like to show some couple of data, what it has changed, what it has not changed. And then I'd like to, make a kind of comments and some questions on what Frank said. I'd like to, okay. Yeah. Okay. But Frank is such a decent, very, good, Japan specialist. So he tend to be very, fair and very legitimate how to judge the situation in Japan. But I'm Japanese, so I'm not quite sure I'm originally Japanese or not. But anyway, because of Japanese, regarding the own country, I tend to be very strict. I mean, higher expectation to it. But the U.S. is one of the closest country in my life. So then, of course, I can share a kind of worrisome, very much worrisome the situation in the United States. So it's not Japan, the United States. This is a very global type of the issues that is gender inequality. So I also the socialist demographer, so I'm doing demographic issues as well. So these kind of issues are very common, and we are very much challenging in society. So I'd like to show again some basic. Wow, doesn't move here. Why doesn't move? Oops. Okay, here you go. So I picked some OECD data to show how had changed in Japan. One is, the left-hand side of the figures. This is about the trend in employment rate between men and women. So red line denotes female, figures. So you can see how much, progress or increase in the labor force participation rate among women, the more precisely employment rate. And the below of that figures on the left-hand side is employment, employment status, actually, a kind of difference employment status between Japan and the OECD countries. So I like to make sure that Japan is not very behind in terms of female labor force participation rate. Say, look, I'd like you to see the 1960s or a kind of, early 70s, you can see the higher rate of female labor force participation rate in Japan than in the OECD average. But now, and you can see also, this is the kind of the number of the people at work divided by those aged 50 to 64. So you can see relatively high, degree of women in the labor market. But what kind of the situation in the labor market is a different issues. So the right-hand side and on the top, you can see the wage, gap between men and women. The situation getting better, so the wage gap getting, improved. But still, Japan is very much, very much facing the problem of wage gap among the OECD countries. You can see the huge gap between the OECD average and the Japanese, wage gap by gender. And the lower side of the figures is talk about public employment and representations. So the red symbols shows the Japanese figures. So you can see how small the woman and woman representing the organization is quite small. The change is quite small in Japan. So Frank has also mentioned about ranking of so-called global gender gap index. So one of the main questions raised by Frank was why the ranking is so low, even though Japan is still looking according to the GDP ranking, still we are in a fifth. It's not second anymore, but in the fifth in the very latest figures. But look, this kind of ranking is really, really low. But overall, gender inequality or gender gap is a quite common challenge. So in order to achieve, gender parity, so-called, the numbers between men and women and identical. If you focusing on the parity, statistical parity, we achieved only, less than 70% in gender parity. So regarding the gender parity, it's not necessarily the identical of gender equality. So the point is the definition to be equal is not simple. I mean, the quite complicated issue. I think this is one of the important reasons why Japan is so behind in terms of this kind of situation, because how to implement the concrete definition of being equal is quite differently set in the Japanese societies. So the politics is also the very hard area in which you can achieve, gender parity. So on average, only 20% of the entire country, achieved gender parity in a word. So workplace representation is also very much, close to the 50. But still, if you look at some kind of higher managers, you can see the number is reduced to less than 1/3. So the last figure is a very interesting to show how much reduction, how much reduce in the number of female incumbent. If you can see the female and a female person who are starting their job, the percentage is quite not that much low. But if you look at the woman in the higher position, so-called and C-suite, the number, corresponding number is getting smaller. So the gap is really large. Of course, in the numbers itself varies by industry, but still, this is again gender gap or drop, commonly found in all over the world. But the Japanese situation is very much, serious. And this is one of the reasons why global gender gap indexes, index developed by the World Economic Forum weighted, very much leadership, situations. So different kind of indices you can see related to the gender gap. But here, they focusing on the 4 areas and taking into account the female leadership. This is one reason why the Japanese ranking getting lower. So this is a fact. This is a very important fact. We can't ignore. We have to face it. So the point is, I don't mean that, the higher number of the women and the higher ranking is the solve every problems. But how many of the women in a higher position is one of the proxy to show how the promotion process and how the judgment or assessment of their performance are equal. So then again, how to measure being equal and how to define the equal in various ranking and labor market structure is the key. At the end, Frank, mentioned to the term of structure. So this is the key issues. Law is very important. And again, Amex also one of the very important, case. And because of that, there is a kind of breakthrough or the following some actual cases. But I'd like to see overall or scale up situations. In order to see the society change, we have to make sure how much the change can be pronounced on the macro level. So this is an situation in Japan. Again, politics or some economies, particularly in the leadership area, are pretty much small in number. Again, this is one of the major reasons why the so-called gender gap indices is really low, and this ranking remains low. That's another issues. Compared with the other G7 countries, some countries say including Italy or sometimes France, the situation was not that much difference in late mid 2000, but the situation has improved while Japanese situations doesn't improve. So what has changed? Again, as you can see, the gender gap in educational attainment reflected in tertiary enrollment rate has narrowed. Actually, the enrollment rate to the college getting increased among the girl of high school graduate. Attitude towards the gender division of labor has become less traditional with an increasing number of people opposing it. This is actually the survey, according to the survey about the attitude towards the gender division of labor, the many people said, okay, gender division of labor is not the proper way to think. Yes, that's a kind of the change. And or the time men spend on household chores, including raising the kids, now has increased. Saying that nowadays in the kindergarten, you can see the more dad, brought their children to children. So this is a good situation and better. I have to say that when I came back from the States in mid 1990s, still the dad brought the babies, their girl children to the nursery school, quite small in number. And in fact, my husband was very much sympathized and by it. Some of the moms seriously thought I was in hospital. That's why he's the only one who who brought their children. So that was reality. But now it's changing, including some of the faculties in the University of Tokyo. But what has not changed are quite a few, unfortunately. The number of the children, the female students, I'm sorry, oops. The number of the female in STEM are also quite small in minority. Of course, and the girls I don't think all girls should go to the science areas. I don't think so. But why there's such a gender gap, and STEM field are pretty large. This is in Japan. This is one of the countries, including compared with developing countries, one of the worst countries to show such a high gap, and the number of the girls in the STEM field. Why is that? Or the time has spent on household chores has increased, as I said, but the still current situation is not good enough. And the gender gap is pretty still high. And finally, the number of the women in senior management positions remains very low. This is one of the symbols, the number, how many women in the senior management level. As I have said pretty, frequently, why we need the people with various background should be seated on the final, on the table to make the final decision in order to make these decisions more profitable and more innovative. So this is, variety of people should be set on this kind of situation is one of the tool, in other words, one of the method to make the society or company and innovative. So the wider situation for gender equality in Japan and then improved for such a long time, including some fufu-based issues as well. So the fundamental social systems has been built on the basis of gender-based division of labor. So assumptions to build the various social systems based on the gender-based division of labor. So the assumption itself or norm or value to fundamental social systems are embedded very deeply. And bringing about the fundamental social revolution comes at a high cost. Of course, I don't think this kind of high gender gap is all of it's big error. Some of them take advantage of this kind of social reality, unfortunately, including a woman. But again, in order to make Japan more innovative, because Japan is the most Asian country in the world, how we can make this country, move forward, more innovative or more, challenging society, then we need some good people with the very, new kind of perspective. So there's no, but in order to make a change, because we have stayed the same at such same long time, we have to pay a lot of cost, and we need time to make the situation visible. So we need a longer investment to see the result. And in this investment doesn't mean necessary or guarantee to be a positive benefit, at the end. So this is a risk. We have to take a risk to get the better result. And no strong consensus on how to address persistent gender gap. Again, the fufu-based, that we do not underestimate the importance of family. We have different kinds of families, no matter what. So even though someone choose or select their surname differently with their husband, it doesn't mean necessarily that we do not, I don't love my husband. I really love him. And I love my families, but we use different kinds of surnames. So that, the options, the key is options. Options are guaranteed to make the people's life more forward. The fourth, the implementation of various laws, acts often fail. I shouldn't say fail, but it's too strong. But it a kind of time lag to translate effectively into the real change social systems. So it's not instant, but the law is a key, first step to make the change, happen. But in order to make this happen continuous, we need more structural system being changed. The time frames for addressing deep-rooted gender inequality differ, unfortunately, across sectors, particularly politics, economy, and society, and different kinds of assessment and the different layers of assessment. So there is this justification to be equal in various systems, but it is not continuously connected to each other to the end. That's a kind of the situation in Japan. That's one kind of the reason why at the end, the number of female leaders are pretty much small. So value change is essential to promote gender equality, though we must be patient, unfortunately. Its positive result may take time. But we couldn't give in because we like Japan or even the U.S. I mean, U.S. and our neighbor in the Asian on all of the globe, and more sustainable and better. So long-term investment and a firm commitment to improving gender equality are critical, including ongoing effort to correct conscious bias. And conscious bias is, it's hard to be resolved, but we keep, making a continuous effort to do so. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Sawako, for really comprehensive, thought-provoking comments to Frank's lecture. And I wondered whether you might like to, maybe Frank, would you like to respond to some of?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes, okay.
But
So please, yes.
I wrote down at the very end, not instant. Change like this is not instant. So to show name. I have two questions. I have also studied the same-sex marriage issue. I know a little bit about the, I think what's called selective surnames, fufu besse. And I wonder whether, Sawako, you think that same-sex marriage, fufu besse, and gender discrimination in employment, and this is a real question. Usually when academics ask questions, they aren't real questions. But are they all gender questions? Are they related, or are they distinct questions that don't necessarily relate to each other? And the second question is, we just talked to our son, and our son works remotely. He's in a small company with 30 people. He never physically sees any other employees. I think that will be the future in Japan and the United States. And I wonder if you think that will have any effect on gender relationships. Two easy questions.
Thank you. Very, very difficult two questions. I'm very happy to have this kind of critical questions. It's not the first, regarding the first question, it's not only the gender issues. Gender issues pretty much deeply associated, but beyond simple gender questions, the roommate issue is option is guaranteeing equality and equal opportunity. So, for instance, sexual orientations, people are different kinds of sexual orientations. Whom you like to get married to, or whom you are, fall in love. This is, their, matters. But the options are pretty much limited just because of homosexuality oriented, or just being the woman, or just being the man. I think this is quite unfair. So you can play a mom's role or a dad's role, or we shouldn't say mom and dad or parents, or some caring for elderly people. It doesn't matter whether you're a man, a woman, or you're LGBTQ. This is your orientation, but what kind of roles you like to play, and what kind of field you like to study is a kind of different kind of options. So the Japan is very efficient, and as you say, a kind of successful society, because screening criteria has been very simple: gender and age. That's it. I mean, no one can deny who's going to be okay. The gender, of course, personality and the statistical point of view, you had better ask your gender at the birth, and then your gender at the survey or something like that. But then overall, it's not that frequently change your gender identification or gender status or age. Wow, no matter what kind of supplement you take, you can't resist your aging. So these two, simple criteria has been very deeply ended. That's why we can, Japan can succeed such a short period of time. So this is a very efficient way to move forward. But again, the problem is that, you know, no matter whether you're a man or woman, or no matter you are 20 or 60s and 80s, what is your strength? What is your performance? Performance is very time dependent, but then, it's a slightly different issue. So these kind of issues beyond the gender issues. That's why I sometimes still, I'm not the gender expert. I'm sociologist. I'm a trained sociologist. My supervisor hated by the feminists, unfortunately. But then anyway, John Goldthorpe has been hated by the feminists. But anyway, so this is beyond, again, this is just a simple, women's issues. And the second, regarding the second question, the relationship might be different, but the dividing kind of the issues getting more complicated without any actual connection, because the network and the connection getting more and more important indeed. AI cannot make network some point. AI can ask a question. I like AI. Actually, this is fascinating. But the AI is not, almighty. And connections and relationships and networks getting more and more important as fundamental resources. So that situation, maybe if you do not have enough, first capitals or first, advantageous positions, the situation is getting more and more in disadvantages to some extent. So the situation might be different, but maybe in more factors we have to take into account to make the society equal.
Thank you.
Frank, are you interested in, or can I just come in at this point?
I
Because-
have one
Yes.
comment, and
Yes.
then I'd love to
Okay,
see if
please.
the audience
Yep.
has any. I wonder, one of the things that has always been irritating to me about, and maybe other foreigners, but about Japanese talking about Japan, is when the Japanese say, Japan is a semai kuni, and then it's wareware Nihonjin. These are two phrases. Semai kuni is we're just a small country, an island country, like Bermuda or something. And the wareware Nihonjin is we're all the same. And it drives me crazy for many reasons. But one reason it drives me crazy, or used to drive me crazy, is I reacted against that. So when I came to Japan, I studied the pollution question, which divided Japan. I studied what is called the Dowa Shoshin no question. I studied out groups, but the truth may be that compared to the United States, Semai Kuni Dakara is like Japan's very small, but Japan is the size of California. California, if it were an independent country, as Japan is, would be a big country compared to most countries in Africa, most countries in Europe. So part of it is my reaction as over the many, many years that I've been studying Japan is maybe wareware Nihonjin is correct in the following sense. I just told a Japanese student who's about to go to the US, I tell all Japanese students and Chinese and others to drive across the country, which I do. I've done it many, many times. And not take the highways, take the small roads. I do it in Japan too. Go to local bars. You will find how incredibly diverse the United States is. When my wife and I drive around Kyushu or Kansai, it's different from Kanto, Kansai Ben wakarahen, Tokyo no hito wa Kansai Ben wakarahen. But the truth is, you really can't say wareware Nihonjin. And there's a kind of homogeneity, which I've always hated, but about Japan, that may make change more difficult. So in the United States, if you have a place that is places that are so different as New York City, Wyoming, and Alabama, the people in those three places can do things that start a movement without having, so the movement can start in New York without having it have to be accepted in Alabama for decades. But the movement will continue, whereas I don't see that. So my reaction is to agree with what Sawako said there about not instant, and this, I think what you said with the screening criteria were very simple and stable in Japan. They aren't simple and they're not stable from Wyoming to Alabama and to New York.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with what Frank says. Actually, I always annoyed we Japanese, but now, Americans say we Americans. You see, it's very much dangerous, a kind of term. And in other words, even though I said two clear criteria, gender and age, but within the age, within the woman or man, there are the differences. But from the structurally, some systematically, the heterogeneity within the subgroups tend to be ignored, or makes them more efficient way to grouping together. So that's one of the external pressure within Japan. But I do agree that I I also think that how much I don't know the situation even in Japan. I grew up very rural area. I moved to, Kyoto City and Tokyo and moved out. I live in Europe, but still I know the quite limited, the portion of the society. Now I'm working on the related to the UN. I don't know exactly what's going on in the entire world. So the thing is, but in the 1980s and in the 80s and the 90s, the United States thought, diversity or differences makes the society more strong, right? So this is a kind of, that's why, positive action, what has been implemented to make the society more, strong and diversified and profitable. But in Japan, I don't see that they didn't invest such kind of consideration in the system quite long time, how to adopt differences, how to adopt, heterogeneity. But again, Japan is not homogeneous, that's for sure. And that's why when I left Japan in 1980s and the 1980s and late 1980s, I totally against the myth of homogeneity in Japan. So they're quite annoyed. We are different, but yeah, that's why.
Yeah. Okay. So I could, if I could just add to this, this, this thing about, the myth of Japanese homogeneity, and as we all know, there's been quite a lot of works done on this over the last few decades. But what sorry, what what we often forget is that in pre-war Japan, because I'm a historian, I'm so sorry, I can only think of historical examples. But so Japan, so pre-war Japan, we might normally consider, if you actually are just looking at Japan, as really quite a strongly nation-state bounded national identity. What is Japanese? What is this? And we Japanese trying to be, first-rate country, Itokoku, amongst the, amongst the Western sort of great powers of the day and so on. But when Japan began to acquire, colonies, as the Japanese colonial empire expanded, the Japanese sort of rhetoric had to change, you see, to adjust to this expanding sort of ethnicities within the so-called Japanese empire. So in that, and then one of the very famous colonial anthropologists called Tori Ryuzo, he sort of began to write that actually Japan is a country that has lots of different roots. And this is why, we are actually very suited to having an empire with lots of different people, because, we're connected to all sorts of different peoples in the region. And so in that sense, you see, that kind of like what seems like quite a firm sort of, essentialist belief in one's identity is actually, as we all know, they're all socially constructed. So depending on the politics of the day and the needs of the state, it can change, at least it did in the pre-war period. And you can also think about the post-war period as being, when, we've been talking about it needs time to change, the kind of temporal dimension of how changes occur over time. And you know, yes, why does it have to take time to change? It is true that when you have wars and revolutions, there are more opportunities for massive social changes, because different systems come in and so on. But in Japan's case, it actually didn't lead to gender equality or, even though women gained female suffrage, it didn't actually affect that. So in a way, I just kind of think that there probably has to be a lot more to change things. And so this goes back to your big point about the role of law in society. And because I am very interested by your sort of big, broad, kind of challenging question, like, what is the role of law in all this? And because you kind of gave us examples of laws which had been passed in Japan, and you yourself said many times that Japanese laws is actually on gender or equality is actually more or less the same as the French laws and the United American laws and all this. And I don't know if I misunderstood you, but if that is the case, there is actually a problem, right? Because I think you and Sawako both actually point to the gap between law and reality. So why is there this gap? Why can't law do more to close this gap? And this is the question I wanted to ask you, Frank, because it seems to me it's not enough to say that, yes, legally, Japan actually has all these sort of laws which seem comparable to other societies in G7 or what have you. But for some reason, things are not happening in this country and in this society. And I'm sort of beginning to wonder that maybe that's not enough, you see, because if there is something that law can do, like maybe there has to be more laws, or something, and maybe haven't gone further enough, just because France and the United States didn't have to go that far. So therefore, Japan thinks that it's done enough in terms of legal sort of framework in order to say that, yes, we have done it. It's just that this society and culture, I know that you're very skeptical of that word, but what is it that we can do? And that is actually my big sort of question from today's. So anyway, please.
So I have a recommendation for this question. Laws are often adopted not in order to change society to be consistent with that law, but for other reasons. So, and that was the argument of people who I criticize about the Equal Employment Opportunity Law. They're saying, oh, we'll have this law, but it doesn't mean anything in Japan. We'll have it because the Americans made us have it. And I think that's fundamentally wrong with the Equal Employment Opportunity Law. But there is a phenomenon around the globe in poor countries where Western countries, and including here, Japan and the United Nations, force, and I use that, coerce, pressure, whatever word you want to use, poor countries to adopt laws. And there's a wonderful, wonderful movie. I teach a course at New York University School of Law, Law, Film, and Society. And one of the best movies there in this topic is, I don't know whether it can be seen. It's Moolad, Moolaade, I think. It's about Burkina Faso, I think, the country just below Japan, or just above. Burkina Faso passed a law because they had to, of gender equality. It had an effect in the capital city. In the local regions, in the rural regions, it did not. Until a single woman, an individual, did not want her daughter to have to be circumcised. What in the English is called female genital mutilation. And she resisted. How did she resist? She referred to the law that the people in this rural village thought was irrelevant to them. But she used that law to create change in her rural village. So even when the law is just a kazari, if that's the right word, it can provide a resource for people to call on. A contrary example is post-Civil War American South, where you had the law, but with the Constitution was equality, but the society was totally unequal. And so it all comes down to politics and social action and the creation and changing of norms. So in the United States, one of the significant, not huge, but significant factors in change racial relationships in the United States was baseball. Jackie Robinson, Brooklyn Dodgers. And I think one of the, this is much, 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 much less important, but it's contemporary. And in case we have any young teenagers watching, it might be relevant to them. Ohtani Shohei and the other Japanese baseball players are going to change the way Americans think about Japan. They're not going to think about Japan, which always irritated me. They always think about, it's not wari wari nihonjin. It's, you know, it's Honda, Toyota, computers, and Zen. Zen, as if, you know, as if we were all sitting around, I mean, or Ikebana, you know, all the Japanese, all they do is, when they're not at a Zen temple, they're doing flower arranging. But Ohtani Shohei and is going to show Americans at a deep cultural level that Japan is just as complicated a country. Well, it's not just as complicated because of geography, but that it's in terms of, anyway, that it's a much more complicated country than just a country where the trains run on time.
Yeah. Comment? Yes, one individual make the society change. Yes, that's true. And furthermore, as an historian perspectives, Japan is a country, you know, can make the society change. Yes, we can change it. But the point is, the law is very important indeed to make this society guarantee or, you know, keep the very basic, you know, the values, including human rights issues. So I don't mean that law is just a decoration. I strongly oppose it. But how to implement this kind of law in real societies, you know, we should, you know, think more seriously, or we should make more, you know, create more closer connections between the law and the real life to some extent. Say in 1985, equal employment law, when that time, what Japan, you know, has done was created two different kinds of the track, career track, just for the woman. One is the track almost equal to man, existing, you know, man's track, and the other one is so-called woman's track. So that they are equal in some way, but that they are wise enough to keep the conventional actual rule regulations, actual real regulations within them, introducing a new law. So maybe the Japanese people needs more, time to discuss and how to make this kind of important law, make that or implement it or substantiate it in the societies. So again, I think Japan can change, and I think that one people can make it change, and breaking through the situations that can be happened in any point. So, but again, we should be more, to some extent, aggressive to make it change, and I believe it in every kind of the chance to be better.
I mean, one of the things that's very striking about Japan coming from outside is that, a lot of Japanese women are very highly educated. And of course, things are changing, gradually, and there are more women in positions, let's say middle-ranking management positions, or even some senior management, although the numbers are really very small, right? But the thing is, it's you kind of need you need really quite a strong kind of collective determination to do this, because it's not a woman's problem. Because this is the problem that a lot of societies, when they're dealing with this kind of gender gap and equity issue, that they think it's a women's issue, and it's not, because when you have 50% of women, more than 50% now in many societies, population-wise, then it's actually, could be actually even a majority issue, and it's, I just think it's such a wasted resource. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that this country essentially has very highly educated women who could be much more kind of in society, in any aspect of society, kind of doing like constructive stuff, And I think it must be one of the really sort of, isn't it? I mean, I don't know the statistics, but really probably quite an unusual example of having such a highly educated population, particularly women, and they do not actually have the opportunity to, yes, Frank, I think you got the last word because I've been pointing to the time.
Okay,
Yes,
so
please do.
this goes back to the very first thing I said. It's not just about women. And it's not just about women becoming CEOs of corporations. It's about men who want to spend time with their children being able to do so. It's fathers having a choice to be a father while the mother becomes the CEO, and have that be accepted. And it's happening in the United States at a very slow level, but among the next generation, which is quite a drop down in the 40s, we know 3 families very, very well where the fathers are largely at home and the mothers are out pursuing high-level careers. And that may never become, because of physical differences, all kinds of things, it may never become 50-50, but it doesn't have to. But fathers should be able to have that choice.
Oh, those
Joe Deska.
great words of wisdom, yes. I think we're going to end this panel today. And thank you so much to you, Frank, and to Sawako, and for the discussions. And I didn't actually go to the floor for questions because I can't see any today. So I hope it was interesting. interesting conversation.
I think we had plenty to
Yes,
say
we
for
did. We did.
ourselves.
Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope to see you soon. Actually, we have one tomorrow on another public webinar tomorrow. So please tune in. So thank you so much. Thank you.